let's kick things off this morning with counseling psychologist Dr. Crystal Jane Veerasamy. She's attached to the Wholeness and Wellness Counseling Services, and that number to call to reach them is 347-1042. And this morning we will be focusing on the do's and don'ts on the morning of the examination and even after the examination. What should parents do? What should parents not do? Good morning and welcome, Dr. Veerasamy. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. Hi, morning.
So as I mentioned earlier, SE is here. The nerves were probably in full force last night. I'm sure many students and even parents did not even get a night's rest.
Of course, yeah.
So my first question to you, sometimes no matter how prepared we are for an exam, and it's not just SEA, any examination, you can't just help it but be nervous.
Yep, that is true. I think, like you said, with any exam, especially with SEA, there's a lot of anxiety, and more so parental anxiety. So I think with anxiety itself, it's a very uncomfortable experience. It's a hyperarousal state. And I say about parental anxiety in the sense that if you think of it, this is the first time that a child is writing this exam, a major exam in their life. So it means that the anxiety that they have may not necessarily be as intense as what a parent sees that it may be. So for instance, parents themselves, they've been through this, and this whole idea of doing SEA exams, it raises their own insecurities and their own past fears and anxieties that they possibly had when they were writing the exam.
Wow, that's a very, very interesting point. So two major points you highlighted there. One, it's the first major exam, because I never really thought of why are they stressing so much about this exam? Whatever school you go to, it doesn't really determine much, because there are many students who would have passed for not their first choice and they ended up doing their masters and even their PhDs.
Yeah.
And then you have students who would have gone to the full 7 years first choice schools and they never even completed a first degree or a bachelor's.
Yeah.
And then that second point that you raised, the fact that parents tend to be nervous because it's as though they're reliving that moment.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, I think one of the first things is to be mindful of their own fears and anxieties, in the sense that even the word anxiety, it is an emotion. And a lot of times people, they notice that they're speaking fastly or they're moving quickly or talking rapidly. Their pitch may be like high, but they're not sure that they're anxious. So one of the first things is being mindful that what they're experiencing right now is anxiety. And it's also important to notice whose anxiety is it? Is it the child's anxiety or is it their anxiety? And as a parent, the first thing is being able to notice it, being mindful that this is anxiety. So that's the first thing.
Yes.
The second thing is being okay with knowing, okay, if this is anxiety, what do I do? And then a number of things that as a parent or a caregiver you can do. One of the first things is just talking to someone. So for instance, your spouse or your significant other, just talking about it helps to relieve that anxiety. And you want to do it not in front of the child. You want to make sure that the child is not within earshot of hearing your anxious feelings.
Because they'll transfer to them as well.
Of course, yeah, definitely.
Wow. But on the second, you're looking at it differently. The adrenaline rush, for the child that is, it might be a good thing, is it?
The thing is, if you look at the history of anxiety, anxiety is functional in the sense that it gives you this adrenaline rush, probably to prepare yourself. Yeah. So for instance, there's some people who don't feel anxious at all, and they may not put in like enough work. So it does serve a functional role in the sense that it gives you that edge to probably, you're feeling anxious, so you're motivated to like study harder, work better. But it comes to a point where some anxiety is so overwhelming that it puts a person into a fight, flight, or freeze response where children, they just freeze and they may not remember. And that's where it's about being able to manage the anxiety.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, what should parents or guardians tell their children on a morning like this?
Yeah, of course. I mean, today we have, I think it's 19,185 students registered for SEA examinations. And one of the first things that you could tell your child is just reassurance, giving them that encouragement and validation that you have this, that no matter what it is that you write in that exam today, I'm going to be proud of you. And those words, just simply saying, I am proud of you, that makes a huge difference. It validates their experience. There's nothing more you can do at this point. I mean, it's the morning of the exam, and you can't revise any more than you have already before. So I think right now the most important thing is just acknowledging them, validating them, reassuring them that they did study, that they are okay enough to sit and do this exam.
You mentioned earlier that this is the first major exam, and perhaps that is the reason that we pay so much attention to it and we stress out so much about it.
Yeah.
But really and truly, you know, from your perspective, what do you have to say about the importance of this exam?
Yeah.
Should we stress about it as much as we do?
I think this whole issue of stressing about it is a very socially ingrained, and it's a cultural intergenerational experience, in the sense that I think a lot of the anxiety and the hype around it is kind of related to the historical factors about, if you think of it, at one time when you did an SE exam, back then it was common entrance, there was a pass or fail. So there was this intense thing, like it's a life-changing moment in a child's life.
Yes.
But now I believe that most children are placed into a school, so therefore they would be getting a secondary education. And again, I think that's where they're doing zoning, where it doesn't place emphasis on first choice. But again, it's about educating parents and letting them know that it doesn't matter about what school you pass for, it's a matter about how well you do, and that what you're doing is good enough at this point.
I remember also speaking to, I believe it was a hairdresser, and her daughter was writing the exam. And just talking to her, I realized that she was the one stressing as though she was the one writing the exam. And I could just imagine how she was interacting with her daughter. You know, I'm well needless to say, when I spoke to her after, she said, yes, her daughter passed for her first choice. And, you know, she was so excited, you know, but it's just so interesting that we pay so much attention to that. All right, so secondly, this morning, what should parents give their children to eat? I know that this is probably the morning that they would get up very early and prepare a full meal for them. I mean, things that they've probably never even eaten. Is that advised?
I think one of the most important things on this day as they prepare for exam is to maintain consistency. Having consistency creates security and a sense that they are okay, that they are safe enough. So for instance, I wouldn't say like having this big spread of a meal. I think it's important, for instance, if your child is accustomed eating doubles and cereal every morning, then that's what they should have this morning as well. I think that's what they should have this morning. I think it's really about keeping their daily routine. So for instance, in terms of their normal schedule, conversations, what they're eating, snacks that they may have, I think it's more about keeping that consistency. So for instance, you wouldn't want to have this huge elaborate meal for them when they're not accustomed to that. That creates a lot of anxiety because they're thinking, well, why now? Why do I have to have this big meal?
Yes.
So it's really about maintaining consistency, as that creates stability and security for them.
And what time should they get to the exam room?
Yeah. I think it's important that they're not too early, in the sense just being there and around people that creates anxiety. You want to leave at a reasonable time, but in terms of catering for traffic, road accidents, so I guess they can use different apps. I think there's apps for that where you can project. But you want to be there within a reasonable time, probably like 30 minutes before or something.
Yes.
Possibly a little more. Yeah, but again, not too early where they have 2 hours before the exam, and that creates anxiety.
Definitely. I understand that you recently wrote a blog. What was it all about?
So basically the same things that we're talking about in terms of this whole hype of SEA exams, and tips in terms of what could your parents do for children and what they should avoid probably after the exam as well.
You know, I want to talk a little bit about the structure, the nature of this exam and many other exams. You know, continuous assessment as opposed to this major final exam. What are your thoughts on that? Which way should we go, just based on your studies, your experience?
Yeah. I think personally for me, I'm not sure how I feel about having a child based on this like one final exam. If you think of it, everything is based on this exam today. Even by me saying that, that probably creates anxiety. And that doesn't, I feel personally, that's not like a true measure in terms of their overall experience, their learning experience, and also it doesn't take into account their socio-emotional development. It's purely academic, purely a cognitive thing. So I think probably different assessments, for instance, like SBAs, I think that's like a good measure, even though you get help with it. It helps you in terms of the real work, in the real world, in terms of being able to do research.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even during the, well, we say semester, but during the term, you know, a lot of the times, you know, children and even parents may wait last minute to push in all the work. What is your advice throughout the entire term? I'm sure you would say consistency is important. And then they're swamped with lessons. What are your thoughts on all of that?
I think, again, that is a very cultural thing. So, for instance, I was trained in the UK, and that idea of lessons is not very common. And I think, again, being in the Caribbean, growing up in Trinidad and Tobago, it is a very cultural experience of having to take lessons. But I think it's more about identifying your child's needs, knowing that what challenges they're having, what are their weak topics or subjects, and then getting lessons based on that, not necessarily getting lessons for all subjects. Because I do believe it's about balance, and they need to have an overall development, which includes sports, music.
That's exactly what way. So you think it's absolutely important that students get some sort of exposure to sports?
Sports, music, anything else. I mean, academia is only part of it, and the whole point of education is to have this overall, it's about thinking about the end goal, and the end goal is working, is employment, is being able to function in the workplace. And even right now in my own practice, there are clients who just can't function in the workplace. They're very highly intelligent, but they lack social cues or that emotional intelligence as to how to respond to people. So I think that is important as well.
When we look at the structure of the family and the homes right now, we wonder how conducive homes are for learning, for young people. A lot of the times we have single parents, as we would have mentioned, I think the last time you were here.
Yeah.
You have homes where you have single parents and you have children being unsupervised. You know, what sort of impact is this having on children in terms of their preparation for examinations like this and even school life in general?
You know, that's a very tricky question in the sense that there are so many layers and complexities in that, because it is difficult, I believe, as single parents. It means that they have to do everything on their own or rely heavily on their support system. And if you think of it, it is a very different experience compared to typical nuclear family where there is a mom and dad. So I think it's more about developing support, teachers, schools, communities, religious people, being able to have that community where both children from either a typical nuclear family or single parent have equal opportunities in terms of learning and development.
And another thing, chores. A lot of the times, you know, you speak to children as teachers and you ask them, so why did you not do your homework? Or miss, the amount of work my mom gave me, I had no time to do my homework. What should parents do?
I think chores is important. I mean, maybe that's a personal, but I do think chores is important because it gives you that sense of responsibility, even from very young age. As 3 years old, it's about knowing that, okay, when you play with your toys, being able to pack it away. And that gives them a sense of autonomy and choice, and again, responsibility. So it's about having balance, being able to study and possibly doing chores as well.
Great. So after the exam has ended, what should parents do?
Yeah, that's a very good question, in the sense that I think one of the things that parents do is that they always ask a lot of questions, and it feels like like an interrogation session.
The exam all over again.
Yeah, it's like they're reliving the exam again. So they may ask, you know, how many questions did you do? Did you complete? What did you write for your essay? What did your friends write for their essay? And they also ask, what school do you think you're going to pass for? And I think that all those questions are unnecessary. And again, it's about being mindful that you're asking these questions because this is your anxiety. This is not the child's anxiety. So one of the things that you want to avoid is not asking all these questions. What you could do instead is probably ask, how are you feeling? What are you feeling right now? Are you feeling relieved? Are you feeling tired? So it's about thinking of the child's frame of reference, empathizing with their experience, and just staying with them rather than asking questions.
Excellent advice. As always, thank you so much, Dr. Crystal Jane Veerasamy, of course, attached to the Wholeness and Wellness Counseling Services. The number there is 347-1042. Best of luck to you, students and even parents. Students, of course, who are writing the SEA examination. We take a short break. So much more when we return.